Hello and welcome to the special CNBC Africa broadcast. My name is Nozi Pombanjwa and we're coming to you from Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. And this is where the African Development Week 2016 conference is currently taking place. Now, this is a meeting between the ministers of the African Union and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. And on the agenda of this meeting, one of the key items is assessing Africa's progress in meeting its regional integration objectives. We caught up with UNECA's Executive Secretary, Dr. Carlos Lopes, to get his insights on the progress that the continent has made thus far.
Well, in fact, it's a very disappointing progress because it's very mixed. It's not really where we should be at this point in time. And part of it is because we have always discussed regional integration from a political perspective. It was the Pan-African ideal that has been espoused by everybody since the struggle for independence. There's nothing wrong with it, but what is the best way for us to actually respect such an ideal is to make the discussion very technical. And that was not taking place. It's about treaties, it's about making sure that the capital flows from one country to another, that people have mobility, that they are not stopped at the border, that you can actually have the educational systems compatible, that you can invest in one country but you can move your merchandise to another with the same rules of origin. And it's a very complex world. So we have been working on trying to translate all this political will into technical indicators that will be easy for people to follow. And during the week we are launching the Regional Integration Index, which is a composite of about 30 indicators. So we are no longer just talking about trade, because trade at the end is just a consequence of all these other things not working. That's why our intra-Africa trade is so low. If all these things don't work, you can't have trade. So it was wrong to be discussing trade in isolation from the rest.
One of the key outcomes of the conversation was how to move Africa from theory into practice. And speaking on this issue at a practical level was Her Excellency Fatima Haram. She is the Commissioner responsible for Trade and Industry at the African Union Commission.
Yes, intra-African trade is very low compared to the other region of the world. When you talk about Europe, you're talking about 60%. Asia, 40% and so forth. So it's very, very low at 12%. Even, our, trade with the rest of the world is very, very marginal. It's 3%. So, the lowest ever. And it's very, very important that we really do increase our, intra-African trade. And why is it important? It's important because we can actually, diversify our economy. We can, actually trade, finished goods through that regional value chain. We can actually ease up, our, cross-border trades. So movement of people and, of trade facilitation. When we talk about trade facilitation with the rest of the world, it's important that we talk about trade facilitation within ourselves. And, everybody knows that Africa is endowed with natural resources. Everybody knows that Africa is so important. Investors want to come. But we're not realizing our, our own strength. We're not realizing that, yes, we may produce the same thing. However, if we start, stop trading really just raw commodities, shipping raw material, across and not creating any value, not creating any jobs, not, getting the revenue that required for our infrastructure and so forth, we will continue to be the fragmented Africa, the divided Africa, the small economies, and we can never speak about one Africa, one continental market, one regional, integration agenda. So, but when you talk about, country A can, actually transform, certain commodity to certain extent, then you go to country B and then you add it, and, that encourage this type of made in Africa concept. That means that, actually you can trade more, finished goods. Yeah. It means that you're creating employment in the continent. It means that actually you're creating movement of talent, movement of people. And it's actually the issue of also being proud that we consume made in Africa. We have the population here. The demand is in Africa. We're talking about an Africa that is going to have a middle class. Everybody wants our market. And we need to reflect in what do we need to do so that we can also capture that demand of our markets that everybody is trying to come and compete for.
We've seen that from a political level that in the forms of declarations and agreements that there is a political desire to get this regional value chain that you speak about, but practically on the ground, away from the political podiums, what are the 3 or 4 most important things that you think we need to focus on to get this regional value chain right?
For example, for me as a Commissioner of Trade, I spoke, for example, to a company, what is it again called? And just to say, for example, they're in West Africa. And I was saying to them that I was saying to Nestle, listen, if you want us to just have, memorandum of understanding between the African Union Commission and so forth, and just to really talk about industrialization, all of these things, but really cheap talk, we're not interested. We're interested in, what do we need to do in order for us to produce something. For example, I gave them the example. We produce cocoa in Africa. Since we produce cocoa in Africa, it may not make business sense for you as a Nestle to produce chocolate in Africa. But can we produce our own chocolate, the one that we consume in Africa? So what I want is just let's study, take the cocoa from Africa, take everything, like the cost of production in Africa, and tell me, how much market do you require? Is it just in West Africa? Is it West and Central Africa? Is it the whole Africa? How much access to the market that require? What do you need us to relax, for example, on trade facilitation so that we can move your product across? And that's mean that when you move your product across, you can make your profit. But in the meantime, you have to tell us also, when we do that, when we relax our, custom procedures, when, the chocolate from Cote d'Ivoire can enter easily in Nigeria and in Chad and in other countries, how many jobs are you creating? And then we can bring the Minister of, Industry, Minister of Trade, and then we can talk about, let's take a business, case like this, like the issue of the chocolate. What does it require? And I think that we will be very happy. Maybe that more African children can consume chocolate.
One of the highlights of the conference has been the launching of the Regional Integration Index. To better understand what this tool seeks to achieve, we caught up with Director responsible for Regional Integration and Trade at UNECA, Stephen Karingi.
The Regional Integration Index is a tool that the 3 institutions, the African Development Bank, the African Union Commission, and the Economic Commission for Africa, have developed jointly to help African countries to monitor the progress they are making in the different dimensions that they are pursuing on regional integration. Regional integration in Africa, as you know, is broad. It covers issues of movement of persons. It covers issues of market integration in terms of trade. It covers issues of infrastructure development. It covers issues of us being able to create regional supply, regional value chains. So this index is meant to be a tool that collects data on how each African country is doing in terms of meeting its commitment within the regional economic community that it belongs to and to which it has signed protocols or agreements to advance the regional integration project. What we have found in terms of the work that we have done is that you have countries that are in more than one regional economic community. And so a country may do very well in one regional economic community, but does not do as well, or it performs on average in another regional economic community, because your performance on this index, your performance is also dependent upon what the other partner states within your regional economic community are doing. So take, for instance, a country, say like Kenya. Kenya is a member of IGAD. It's also a member of COMESA. It's also a member of the EAC. It may do well in a particular dimension within one of these 3 regional economic communities, but it may not do as well in the same dimension in another regional economic community for which it's a member. So it does actually introduce complexity. So when it comes now to concluding and making policy recommendations and using it as a tool to inform the policy agenda at the country level, I think analysts and users would have to be aware of this, and that's why I say this is a very good question, because countries do have good reasons why they are members of more than one regional economic community. You cannot fault them for being in more than one regional economic community. So it's a question of how do they interpret these results, because why did they join more than one regional economic community?
From the Center of Migration Studies at the University of Ghana, Professor Mariama Awumbila used her opportunity to speak to the need to change the negative perceptions associated with migration patterns on the continent and to begin to focus on the positives that this might have on the destination market.
Indeed, many African governments see rural-urban migration as negative because they are seen to come in and swamp the cities, and they put pressure on basic amenities and infrastructure in the city. They are said to be contributing to crime and insecurity. In Ghana recently, there were fires and floods, and it was being attributed to migrants who had built up in flood-prone areas and so on. So it's normally seen as negative. The response often is to try and send the migrants back to their areas of origin. But research that we did at the Center for Migration Studies does indicate that many of these migrants who have moved, and they were living in slums, informal settlements, they do earn a lot. It was amazing to see how much. Some of them were even earning more than the average low-income person not living in a slum. They send remittances back home. They were educating their children. They were educating themselves. You know, they were contributing positively, and it was helping them, you know, reduce poverty in their lives. So the rural-urban migrants are playing a key role both in the area of origin as well as in the area of destination. And so we are making the point that governments need to look at how you address that and change from the negative perception.
It appears that regional integration is a continental ideal, but there's still much more work to be done. The conversations here at Africa Development Week 2016 have certainly shone a light on some of the key issues. From Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, for CNBC Africa, I'm Nozi Pombandra. Thank you for joining us.